Hi, I'm Steve Barry, a marketing manager at the Forum Corporation. Today I'm going to share some of our research on transitions, and specifically the things that slow people down in transitions, or what we call the 7 decelerators. At Forum, we've helped leaders with their own transitions for years, and it seems as though the topic has really never been more relevant. These turning points can really have high stakes for people. And for years, the only type of transition that was studied was the role transition, which is when a leader comes in either from the outside or is promoted from within into a new job. And the stunning truth is that a lot of these transitions end in failure. So almost 50% of leaders completely or partially fail to deliver the expected value in their first 18 months in a new role. But it turns out that the role transition is really just the tip of the transition iceberg. Our global study on strategic speed, which is on how leaders accelerate execution and sustain that speed over time, surfaced 4 critical types of transitions that slow or even completely derail leaders. And now each transition path, as we call them, has a similar risk profile and failure rate as the role transition. Let's start with place. So place includes the traditional role transition, and it also includes lateral moves, for example, into a new business unit, or a significant change in the scope of your job or your responsibilities. All of these have the same impact and the same dangers. Next is assignment, and this involves a special limited-term assignment on a focus project or an initiative to address a specific business issue. The next one here is team, and this was a bit surprising because your role actually doesn't change much, but you have a new team. Maybe you've been assigned a new team or you have significant turnover on your team, and yet you still have all the same pressures and deadlines and results to deliver. So this is yet another critical turning point. And the final one here is heading. And heading is when you don't change, but things around you change. So maybe you have a new boss or the organization has new management at the top. Or maybe the organization has a significant new heading or strategy. And in each case, you need to reassess and realign. So these are the 4 types of transitions that become critical turning points for leaders, which means we need to pay attention to them and manage them. But why do these particular transitions create slowdowns and failure? And usually when we work with groups and we ask that question, people talk about the organizational decelerators, and people love to talk about these and have lots of energy around them. Why don't things work around here? But one of the things that people don't realize is that there are individual decelerators, and these happen without us knowing. These are the actions we think we should be doing, but in fact they're traps. So instead of speeding us up and getting around those turning points, they actually slow us down, and so we call these decelerators. Here are the 7 decelerators. And now these decelerators are natural traps that can slow or completely derail any leader on any path in any industry. And we all have natural susceptibilities to one or more of these. So as I walk through this list of decelerators, reflect upon your own transitions and think about which ones sound like maybe traps you've fallen into in the past that you can avoid in the future. Now the first one here is neglecting to align expectations. And really there are 2 main types of expectations, personal and business. Personal expectations are when people set unrealistic expectations for themselves or allow them to be set for them. So it's important to get clear on things like goals, resources available, and realistic timelines. And it's also important to know how you work together with your boss and your new team. How are we going to communicate? What are our decision rights or boundaries there, and so forth. And there are also business expectations. And it's important to get really clear about the underlying business situation and get agreement on the course of action that you'll take in light of that situation. Now, in worst case scenarios, and sometimes this happens maybe in an acquisition situation or in a matrix organization, you have what's called the stealth mandate, and that's where some groups expect you to do one thing which conflicts with the expectations of another group. So it's really important to get clear on expectations. The next decelerator here is racing to get a lot done. And this is a tricky one because of the premium that organizations place on results. And if you don't produce results quickly enough, you could be out of a job. And so people tend to overemphasize quick action and sort of run off in 10 different directions at once. and scatter their attention and their team's attention. And the other thing that happens is people will rush in to look for that quick win. And in the process of doing that, they alienate their team because they're looking to make a name for themselves. And so what we talk about here is looking for that collective quick win. What is it that you can accomplish with your team together and have that be a quick win? The next one is ignoring what you don't know. And it's often what we don't know and need to learn that causes avoidable problems. Now, an example here might be in a reorganization where you don't change but your organization does. And you need to find out, does the new leader of the organization understand the value that you and your team provide? And many times, people simply don't know and assume that the new leader just gets it. And what we've seen happen in some cases is that they might be out of a job in 6 months. The next decelerator is relying too heavily on past experience. Do you know that saying, to a hammer, everything's a nail? This decelerator is kind of like that. Now, leaders are often chosen because of their experience and the things that they've accomplished in the past, so it's only natural that they would emphasize those strengths and experiences throughout the transition and gravitate toward things they understand. So a leader with a strong operational background is going to gravitate toward those operational details, when in fact they may need to take a more broad focus at the overall strategy. And so what worked in the past might not work now. The next decelerator is devoting energy to the wrong people. And this one manifests itself in several ways. One is a poor assessment of people in the new landscape. So sticking with a team member for too long. Or another example is when a leader is new to a place and people will almost pounce on them or try to sway them to see things their way, even though that might not be the right way or the best way. And the next one is isolation. So there's a natural tendency to rely on existing relationships to the exclusion of new relationships. Or also isolation can happen if you stick to your closest relationships, so sticking with your manager and your team and ignoring other stakeholders. Instead, what we've advised leaders to do is to build strategic relationships. And we also talk about the fact that adversaries are not forever. So when business changes, people's goals and underlying motivations often change, which means relationships can change. And people you never thought would support you, they just might, so don't write them off. The next one here is believing there is an answer. And this one's sometimes kind of a head-scratcher for people. They think, what does that mean? What is that? And really what it is, it's ignoring the complexity and lack of predictability of most business situations today and believing in the myth of, the one right answer. And in some ways, this is the opposite of number two, in that people can spend too much time contemplating their next big move, when in more complex situations, it may be best simply to act, assess the result, course correct if necessary, and again, try to get that collective quick win. And so the dilemma here is to find out who would be impacted by which actions and think through the ramifications of that. The last decelerator is, in some ways, one of the most common ones we saw in our strategic speed research, and that was focusing on process more than people. And so what this means is that people will come in and start making changes to the specific tasks, coordinating around those tasks, coordinating resources, without first stopping and just get people involved in a discussion around what is it that we're really trying to accomplish here? And, what are people's ideas on how to do that? And so focusing on the ends versus the means. And I say that we found a research article called Means versus Ends, which showed that teams which focus on process at the outset end up not performing as well as others, in that when things change, maybe a team member is removed or some other variable changes, they can't adapt as well. But if the team and the leader had an outcome focus, so what they're really trying to accomplish together and what is the context in which they're operating, that focus leads to a more adaptable team and better results when things change midway through, as they inevitably do. Okay, so those are the 7 decelerators. Which decelerator do you think sounds like the one that you're most susceptible to? And how might that manifest itself in your current transition path or your next transition path? Thanks for listening to this presentation from Forum. Now, since 1971, we've worked with leaders to avoid their individual and organizational decelerators and accelerate business performance, organizational change, and growth. For more on these issues, or to hear more on the learning, where, and coaching that we have specifically around leading through transitions, please call 1-800-FORUM-11. That's 1-800-FORUM-11. Thanks again.